Have you ever been the useless one in your family? The one no one takes seriously? Then you'll understand. Because that's exactly what I was, until everything changed. I was always the one who didn't quite fit. In a family like mine, dripping in old money, handshakes with senators, and smiles that were more about optics than warmth, there was no room for failure. My siblings were born for it. My older brother Nathaniel, the golden boy, practically came out of the womb in a tailored suit. My sister Lauren was already running charity galas by the time she was 22. Me? I barely made it through community college. My dad, Charles Whitmore, never missed a chance to remind me that I was a disappointment. "You've got the Whitmore name, Logan, but none of the discipline," he'd say, sipping his 12-year-old scotch while I tried not to fidget under his stare. I was the third-born, the unexpected one, the one who never really had a place in the machine they called the family business. Whitmore and Crane was a multi-generational real estate empire based out of Connecticut. They developed luxury high-rises, commercial skyscrapers, even renovated historical landmarks. Their name was carved into the skyline. And I was the screw-up who once totaled a company car trying to make a pizza delivery gig work. They kept me around like a stray they couldn't quite kick out. I was technically in the marketing department, which meant I sat in a gray cubicle on the 11th floor and answered emails no one cared about. No one gave me responsibility, which suited them fine. I was the quiet embarrassment. As long as I didn't cause waves, I was tolerated. Then everything changed when my father had a stroke. It hit hard and fast. One moment he was grilling my brother about overseas investments. The next he was slumped in his office chair. The doctors said he'd survive, but he wouldn't be the same. He couldn't speak clearly, couldn't walk without help, and certainly couldn't run a company. In a snap, Nathaniel was named interim CEO. What followed was a descent into chaos masked by polite smiles and polite press releases. Nathaniel started making aggressive investments in international markets that weren't properly vetted. There were whispers about laundering money through shell companies in Dubai. Lauren tried to keep the public image clean, but every event she hosted started feeling like a funeral, stiff, cold, desperate. I watched from the sidelines, same as always. But now, I was watching a fire spread through the house that raised me, and it didn't make me happy. I thought it would. I thought seeing them falter would be satisfying, but it wasn't. It felt like watching your worst enemy drown in the same boat you're in. That's when I started staying late at the office. It began with curiosity. I'd poke around in old project folders, audit trails, see what decisions Nathaniel had made and when. Then it became something more. I started seeing patterns, wrong numbers, buried expenses, missing documents. I printed them out, highlighted them, connected dots like a madman in the war room. It wasn't long before I found the thing that would change everything. A quiet little transfer of $8.3 million to an account registered under a defunct holding company. That company, it turns out, was linked to a man named Carlos Gutierrez, Nathaniel's college roommate, and now an executive at a shady offshore development firm in the Cayman Islands. That same week, I got a call from HR saying my position was being restructured. I didn't argue. I nodded, packed my things, and walked out the building like a ghost. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I drove straight to my father's estate, past the gatehouse, ignoring the staff who tried to stop me. I found him sitting in his sunroom, looking small and lost in a wheelchair, a wool blanket draped over his knees like some old Civil War veteran. He looked up at me like I was a stranger, but I sat down and started talking. Not to make peace, not to seek approval. I started telling him what Nathaniel was doing to the company. At first, he just blinked, but then something changed in his eyes. A flicker, a spark. He reached for a notepad and slowly, painstakingly, wrote 3 words. Trust the file. I didn't know what it meant then, but I would. I went home and didn't sleep. I kept replaying those 3 words over and over again. Trust the file. Was it metaphorical? A memory? A warning? The next morning, I drove back to the estate. I convinced Marta, my father's nurse, to let me into his study. No one had touched it since the stroke. The room smelled like cigars and old paper. I searched every shelf, drawer, and file cabinet. I was halfway through the bottom drawer of an antique filing chest when I found it. A manila folder with a worn red sticker across the tab. On it, in my father's blocky handwriting, were the words Succession Contingency. Inside, I found more than I could have hoped for. Documents, board memos, correspondence, and most importantly, a legal clause tucked into an executive amendment from 2012. It was buried deep in complex legalese, but once decoded, it was clear. If the acting CEO was found engaging in criminal or unethical behavior, control of the company would immediately revert to the next eligible bloodline shareholder, me. Not Nathaniel, not Lauren, me. It was a nuclear option. My father had drafted it after a legal scandal involving a former CFO, and I guess he never expected to use it. But he prepared for the worst. And now, the worst had arrived. I spent the next few weeks building my case in secret. I had contacts, people who owed me favors from my screw-up years, ironically. A guy I used to work security shifts with at a casino helped me trace offshore wire transfers. A bartender who once bailed me out of a drunken mess had a sister in the IRS. Slowly, methodically, I constructed a dossier that made Enron look like a clerical error. But information wasn't enough. I needed leverage, and I found it in the most unexpected place, Lauren. I confronted her one night in her apartment. She opened the door with a glass of red wine in one hand and irritation in the other. "What do you want, Logan?" "I have a fundraiser tomorrow." I handed her the dossier. She rolled her eyes until she started reading. Her hand began to tremble by page 3. She didn't look up until the very end. I thought he was just gambling. "Not this." "You didn't know?" I knew something was off. I didn't know it was this. "Then help me." She sat down, the weight of it all crashing onto her like a wave. After a long pause, she nodded. That's when things moved quickly. Lauren used her PR muscle to prepare a narrative. A redemption arc, new leadership, new transparency, the Whitmore name saved from corruption. Meanwhile, I went straight to the board. Presenting the evidence was like walking into a gunfight holding a nuclear bomb. The room was full of stiff suits, all loyal to Nathaniel, all skeptical of me, until they saw the paperwork. The moment I laid down the succession clause, the oxygen left the room. They didn't speak. They didn't argue. They just adjourned. 2 days later, I got the call. Nathaniel had stepped down due to personal reasons. An internal investigation was pending. And effective immediately, Logan Whitmore was appointed acting CEO. The moment I walked into the corner office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I'd stepped into the cockpit of a crashing plane. The company was bleeding money. Morale was poison. The partners were skittish, and the press was circling like sharks. But it didn't matter. I was in control. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the punchline. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the wolf at the head of the table. Lauren became my right hand. She wasn't interested in the grind of day-to-day operations, but she helped clean up the public mess. We framed Nathaniel's exit as a noble retreat and quietly cooperated with federal investigations. The board backed us because, frankly, they had no better options. And Nathaniel? He disappeared to Europe under the guise of rehab. He never contacted me. Not once. I dove into the work. I learned faster than anyone expected. I wasn't a prodigy, but I listened. I studied. I rebuilt. I cleaned house, fired every executive Nathaniel had installed, renegotiated contracts, sold off the toxic assets. Within 9 months, we were back in the black. But none of that compared to what happened one stormy Thursday afternoon. I got a call from Marta. My father had taken a downturn. I left the office without a word. When I arrived, he was in bed, eyes closed, shallow breathing. For the first time since his stroke, he reached for my hand. "You surprised me," he whispered. "I surprised myself," I replied. He smiled, just a flicker, and then he was gone. We buried him with full honors. Politicians came. CEOs gave speeches. But none of them really knew the man like we did. Cold, brilliant, unforgiving, and in the end, human. After the funeral, I went back to his study. There, in the same drawer, I found another file. This one was thinner, just a single sheet of paper. It was a letter to me. "Logan, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. But if you found the file, it means you're the only one who still has the instinct to protect the family name. That matters, more than I ever told you. I was hard on you because I didn't think you had the fight in you. Clearly, I was wrong. You may not be like the rest of them, and thank God for that. Dad." The letter changed something in me. Not all at once, but like water gradually carving a canyon through rock. For so long, I had defined myself by what I wasn't, not Nathaniel, not Lauren, not the heir my father wanted. But now I saw things differently. Maybe I was never meant to be their version of success. Maybe I was meant to build my own version, with sharper edges and calloused hands. Running the company wasn't glamorous. It was long nights and brutal mornings. It was fixing other people's mistakes while being blamed for ones I didn't even make. But it was mine now. And the strangest part? I was good at it. I wasn't the guy giving speeches at charity events or hobnobbing at black tie galas. I was the guy in the back room with a pen and a headache, asking hard questions. And for once, people were answering me. Lauren and I restructured the board. We brought in young talent, hungry, aggressive, and not afraid of getting their hands dirty. The old guard hated it, but they didn't have the votes to stop us. I wasn't just holding the seat, I was changing the shape of the table. And then came the lawsuits. Nathaniel's mess had a long tail. A federal probe into wire fraud. A civil case from a Hong Kong investment group he had conned. I testified. I handed over everything. No deals, no shielding him. I did what my father would have done, what he should have done years ago. That December, Nathaniel was indicted. The family tried to keep it quiet. The press didn't. Headlines screamed across the Northeast. Whitmore scandal erupts, former CEO faces prison. I sat in my office, lights low, the paper open on my desk. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt hollow, like I'd won a war that still hadn't ended. Lauren stopped by that night. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. She sat across from me, no words at first, just the sound of the storm outside the glass walls. "We did what we had to," she said. "Did we?" "Yeah," she said, more firmly. "We did." I nodded. I believed her. Mostly. The next few months blurred. Earnings reports, shareholder meetings, late-night strategy calls. Somewhere in the chaos, I started sleeping in the office. My old apartment felt like someone else's life. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until Marta called me again, this time about Mom. She'd been quiet through it all. Always elegant, always neutral, like a politician's wife. But after Dad's death and Nathaniel's arrest, something broke. Early onset dementia, they said. It came on fast. 1 week she forgot what day it was. The next, she didn't recognize me. I sat with her in the garden of the private care facility. She stared at the lilies like they were old friends. "Logan," she finally said. "Yeah, Mom, I'm here. You're the quiet one." I was. She smiled, soft and distant. "Your father was so hard on you." I didn't respond. "I think he was afraid. You were the only one he couldn't predict. The rest, they played by the rules. You didn't. Is that a good thing?" "I think," she said, touching my hand gently, "that's the best thing." She never said much after that. After she passed, I held a small service. No cameras, no speeches, just family and a few people who'd known her beyond the title of Mrs. Whitmore. Lauren and I stood side by side as they lowered the casket into the earth. Nathaniel wasn't there. No one mentioned him. No one needed to. Later that week, the board convened to officially vote on my permanent appointment as CEO. It was a formality, really. I had the numbers. But when the vote passed unanimous, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just walked back to my office, closed the door, and looked out at the city skyline. My name was now etched into every one of those buildings. My name. I thought about the night I found that first file. About the way Dad's hand trembled when he wrote those 3 words. About the years I'd spent being invisible, being overlooked, being pitted. They used to introduce me at galas as the youngest Whitmore, like an apology. Now, when they said my name, they meant me. And still, I didn't feel like I'd arrived. Not yet. That feeling came weeks later, when I sat alone at a lunch meeting with a tech startup founder. We just acquired their company, and he looked nervous, young, twitchy, like I used to be. "You're not what I expected," he said, glancing at my jeans and unshaven face. "Neither are you," I replied. He laughed, and just like that, the walls between us disappeared. He wasn't afraid of me. He respected me, and for the first time, I felt something settle inside me. Not pride, not power, belonging. The months that followed felt different, not easier, not quieter, just different. There was a rhythm to everything now. Meetings, memos, deadlines, deals, but also something else. A sense that I was finally steering, not just surviving. I wasn't proving anyone wrong anymore. I was proving myself right. Still, the past has sharp corners. And no matter how far I got from it, it found ways to scrape back in. One morning, I was reviewing the development proposal for a multi-use complex in Chicago when I got a text from a blocked number. "You've built your kingdom," Just remember what you buried to get it. No name, no follow-up, but I didn't need either. Nathaniel. I hadn't seen him in over a year. Last I heard, he was living under house arrest in a Manhattan penthouse, awaiting sentencing. Our lawyers said the case was open and shut. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. 10 years minimum, maybe 15. Still, the message shook me. Not because it was a threat, but because it was true. I had buried things. The rage I carried. The nights I cried in my car outside the office. The shame of being invisible in my own family. The cost of loyalty. The way Lauren had started to drink more heavily, even though we both pretended not to notice. The way I avoided mirrors because sometimes I caught a glimpse of my father's face in mine. Later that day, I stood in the old elevator that led to the executive archives, the basement floor no one ever used except for audits and legal backlogs. I hadn't been down there since the beginning, when I'd first found the succession clause. It was quiet, dusty, cold. I unlocked one of the cabinets and pulled out the original folder, Succession Contingency. I held it in my hands for a long time. This thing had started it all. It had broken my family and made me who I was. Maybe it was the key to saving the company. Maybe it was the final nail in its coffin. Depends on who was telling the story. I put it back in the cabinet and locked it. That night, Lauren came by my apartment. She had 2 bottles of wine and a folder of her own. Notes for a proposed rebrand of the company's image. "We should shed the Whitmore name," she said casually, like it wasn't a live grenade. "Why?" "Because it's old. Heavy. Tied to scandals, lawsuits, the past. You've changed the company. Maybe the name should change with it." We sat on the floor, drinking, debating. In the end, we didn't decide anything, but I could see her point. The next morning, I stood in the boardroom and stared at the giant brass plaque on the wall, Whitmore and Crane. EST 1949, everyone expected me to defend it, to protect the legacy. Instead, I said, "We're rebranding. Effective Q3, we're moving forward under a new name." There was silence. Then what name? I paused, looked out the window, thought of all the nights I spent watching the city lights flicker while everyone else assumed I'd already burned out. Blackline Group. A few raised eyebrows. One nod. A slow, building murmur of assent. That was it. A name born not from pride, not from nostalgia, but from what I'd crossed to get here. The black sheep. The black marks. The black line between who I was and who I had to become. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. People started talking about me the way they used to talk about my father. Strategic, brutal, visionary. They said I was turning the company around, that I was the dark horse who'd somehow come out ahead. They said I was unpredictable. Good. Let them say whatever they want. One night, I got another message. No number, just a single line. "You win." It could have been from Nathaniel, or maybe just someone who finally understood what it cost me to get here. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. Because winning wasn't the point anymore. Staying. That was the point. The next morning, I walked into the building, my building, and nodded at the receptionist, who no longer looked past me. I rode the elevator up, past the floor where I used to sit in my gray cubicle, past the middle, to the top. I opened the door to my office, sat down at my desk, and looked out at the skyline. They used to call me the weight around the family's neck. Now I was the one holding it up,